This is Plant-Based Briefing, 3 Often Overlooked Hazards of Animal Agriculture, Part 2 by Nelson Huber-Disla at nutritionstudies.org. And I'm Marian Erickson, your host. This is the Plant-Based Podcast where I curate and narrate with permission a variety of articles on healthy, compassionate, and sustainable living in about 10 minutes or less every weekday. This article was longer than that, so it's a two-parter. I read the first half yesterday, so go back and listen to that first, and then come back here for Part 2. And now let's get to today's Plant-Based Briefing. 3 Often Overlooked Hazards of Animal Agriculture, Part 2 by Nelson Huber-Disla at nutritionstudies.org. Number 3, Occupational Hazards and Worse. Christina Cook wrote an excellent article for Civil Eats in 2022 that investigates not only the dangers of animal agriculture, but also the failure of policymakers to regulate the industry. I would recommend it to anyone interested in learning more about this subject, linked here. Perhaps the most alarming fact she highlights is that the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, is severely limited in its ability to protect farm workers due to provisions in the agency's 1976 budget prohibiting federal funds from being used for OSHA oversight. Exempt farm employers are those with operations of 10 or fewer employees and no temporary labor camp activity within the last year. Such farms escape from the enforcement or administration of all OSHA rules, regulations, standards, or orders. Exemption from OSHA oversight means no health or safety inspections, no response to employee complaints, no safety education and training, no intervention even when there is imminent danger, no reporting of injuries, and more. Because of this loophole, the workers at 96% of operations that hire people to produce pork, eggs, beef, poultry, and milk in America are unprotected. OSHA cannot investigate even after tragedy strikes. 85% of the deaths related to animal agriculture from 2011 to 2020 were not reported to the agency. Some states run their own OSHA offices, and a dozen of these opt out of the exemption, but those states must rely on their own funds for enforcement. As you might expect, these states have lower fatality rates than those that abide by the so-called small farm exemption. That workers' safety is deprioritized in one of the most dangerous occupations is not only nonsensical, it's also by design. The industries and the lobbyists representing them are intent on hiding the dangers of this work from OSHA, journalists, and the public at large. The exemption comes from the same place as ag-gag laws that prohibit images from escaping CAFOs. Under the guise of being pro-business, both laws are sinisterly anti-public, limiting transparency and accountability as much as possible. Despite all of their efforts to hide and minimize the dangers involved in needlessly raising animals for food, we know that those dangers exist. In addition to the most obvious dangers, like being mangled by animals or heavy machinery, CAFOs generate and store many contaminants on site, which can severely damage respiratory health. Workers are constantly exposed to these contaminants, including pesticides, noxious materials, airborne organic dust, methane, and ammonia. The health impacts of working in various agriculture and animal production facilities are manifold, and the majority of the symptoms indicate respiratory exposure to irritants. Full-time barn workers, veterinarians, and residents near CAFOs are exposed to various contaminants and report symptoms ranging from irritation of mucous membrane, eyes, nasal congestion and runny nose, wheezing, coughing, and dyspnea, asthma, asthma-like symptoms, exacerbation of pre-existing asthma, chest tightness, and exercise intolerance. Particularly, barn workers experience annual decline in their lung function. Because of the tenuous immigration status of many farm workers, it is practically impossible for them to advocate for change, even in the worst circumstances. And to be clear, this critique does not apply only to animal agriculture. There are countless examples of modern-day slavery at the heart of our agricultural system. Few cases garner the same level of attention and headlines as Georgia's shocking Operation Blooming Onion, reports Tina Vasquez for PRISM. Migrants from Mexico and Central America were forced to dig for onions with their bare hands under the threat of gun violence, earning just 20 cents for each bucket harvested. At least 2 people died from heat exposure on the job, and 1 woman was repeatedly raped. One of the victims' labor camps was surrounded by electric fences, and they were otherwise held in cramped and unsanitary mobile homes with raw sewage leaks and no access to food or safe drinking water. Such heinous crimes are not nearly as uncommon as you might expect. Trafficking, sexual exploitation, and rape, stolen wages, Dangerously unsanitary conditions and other atrocities are rife in farm-working labor camps, many of which are deliberately hidden from the public eye. In an analysis of Geographic Information Systems, or GIS data, researchers found that more than one-third of farm worker labor camps in East Central North Carolina were hidden. How much suffering are we willing to allow others to endure so that we can enjoy cheaper prices at the grocery store? You can learn more about modern-day slavery and the importance of fair food from the Coalition of Immokalee Workers linked here. Sadly, it doesn't get easier farther down the chain with the nightmarish working conditions in meat processing plants. And because every step of this chain is highly consolidated, big farms can more easily exploit workers without facing any competition or repercussions. Until regulatory institutions wake up from their decades-long comas, we as consumers can raise awareness about the violence of the industrial food system, inform ourselves to more effectively battle against the power, and choose to support more sustainable food systems, the kinds of sustainable food systems that don't directly contribute to numerous existential threats. You just listened to 3 Often Overlooked Hazards of Animal Agriculture, Part 2 by Nelson Huber-Disla at nutritionstudies.org, and I'm your host, Marian Erickson. And I've done a number of other episodes on each of these 3 hazards. I'll link some of those in the show notes, but this was a great summary of all 3 of them, I thought. So please share this episode with anyone who might benefit, and thanks for listening.